Hi, this is Chris from Orange Coast College's Art Department with an overview of levels and curves adjustments in Photoshop for digital illustrators and painters. Now, the thing I would get most upset if you took out of Photoshop would be levels adjustments. I've been using these ever since I started with Photoshop, and I use levels adjustments on almost every single thing that I open. I find that photographs and artwork can all stand from a little more contrast almost all the time. And this is the way to do it. Now, you can see in my layers palette, I've already got a levels adjustment layer open above my background of this watercolor. And it was either a photograph or a scan, and usually they're not perfect representations. And we can always make it a little bit better. The way I get this levels adjustment layer is right here in my levels palette, going here. If you want to know more about adjustment layers, please see our video that's all about them. So when I select a levels adjustment layer, it puts it in right above the previous layer that I was on. In this case, the background was the only layer. And in my properties panel, you'll notice here to the left, I've got all the ways I can configure my levels. Let's take a quick look at what actually we can do, or at least the most important stuff. In the center of my properties palette, I've got what's called a histogram. And what that is it is a graph of data from over here on the far left, all the black that's in the image. Right in the middle is 50% gray, and all the way on the right of our image is the white. And you can see with this image, we should have a lot of white, but as it turns out, the image thinks it's about a 15% gray. And there's not much black at all, and a little bit of values right in the middle of the spectrum. Down below are our output levels, and these are theoretical. We can have the blackest black and the whitest whites available to us. And all these are adjustable both by sliders and by keying in numbers. So let me tell you the thing that I always do that's a quick hit on artwork or photos, and that's just up the contrast so my whites are white and my blacks are black. So it's really simple to do that. I'm going to drag this absolute slider in to cover that big spike of white data. Now you might have been thinking, well, isn't that white? Well, let's take a look. I'm going to make a little marquee selection and fill it with white. Now that is white. What we might have thought was white before was actually a 15 or 20% gray. So let's undo that, hop on back to our levels, and we'll drag that in. So I drag it to the left side of that big spike. So I get our whites white, and I'm going to just drag in my blacks to where I start seeing some data. And then I'm going to just do this by eye. I can make it really dark. That doesn't look great. I just want to start getting some of those dark darks. And that's typically all I would do. I just come in, drag those two sliders, boom, boom, call it done. Now, let's see what that would have looked like originally. There's the original, and here's the enhancement. You'll notice some buttons along the bottom of our properties panel. We've got delete this whole adjustment layer, toggle visibility, reset, previous state, and then if we have multiple layers and we want the adjustment layer to affect only the layer below it, we can make a clipping group with it by hitting this button. So let's take a look at one more. Here's a ink painting of a skull, and I think this could be easily improved by adding an adjustment layer and dragging our black in so we get the black of those eye sockets, and maybe our white into that first spike. And I'd call that done. You may want to mess around and say, should we make those grays a little bit darker in the middle? And I can do that by dragging my 50% gray a little bit closer to the right. So that makes there's more data in our image that's darker than 50%. If I think that's too much, I can go the other direction, and I'm making most of the data less than 50% gray. In this case, I'd probably make it a little bit more. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's look at another very typical example. Here's a drawing that is scanned, and it has the same considerations. So, could there be more contrast? Absolutely. Let's add a levels adjustment layer. You can see the histogram. We've got a lot of white, very little black. Let's go ahead and bring our black into the very little bits of data. You can see all those line weights get a little darker. And I'm going to go ahead and drag our white a little bit into that big spike. This is a great way to digitally increase what might seem like the line weights of your drawing. So if you've done a traditional sketch, you can scan it. And as we sort of drag our black in, those lines seem to get a little bit thicker and a little bit darker. That's probably a little bit much. Let's ease that back out. So this is a super typical example. Now let's say you wanted to just do this pencil sketch and have it like under some tracing paper. Now let's take a look at output levels, this little scale down on the bottom. If I want to make the maximum dark of the lines be quite light, as if I had tracing paper over, I would drag my maximum black output closer across the spectrum. That's about a 25%. And this kind of looks like I did a sketch. I put tracing paper over it. Now I can do a new layer and start painting my final version. Or let's say you really like the look of sketches on medium value paper, where you see the dark lines on gray, and then you can add some highlights. So here I'm going to make the lightest data about 50% gray. So I still have my black lines, but what used to be white is about 50% gray. And at that point, maybe you want to do a style of bringing in the light. So I'm going to go ahead and throw on a new layer in overlay mode. And I can come in here and start painting in with some whites. Went on down. And you get the idea. So, of course, you can do this in grays. Painting with my mouse here, which is not always the easiest. So this can also help you sort of simulate this look. Now, sometimes you may want a little bit more fine-tuned control over your values than levels is giving you. In that case, you want to use curves rather than levels. And let's take a look at an example of that. Here's a photo of a jungle ruin, and it's a little bit dark. There's not a lot of light on the scene. So we could do levels. So we could use levels, but let's take a look at the curves adjustment for this instance. Now in the properties, I've now got a curves histogram. So on the left, I've got all my black data. On the right, I've got all my white data. You can see in this instance, we've got a lot of dark value data. And I've got this diagonal line where this is whitest white, this is darkest dark, and this line is flexible. And I can bend and manipulate that line to go however I want. So for instance, let's manually drag up our darker values and then leave our lighter values kind of as they were. So you can, I'm clicking and dragging on that line, and you can see this bulk of data near 70, 80, 90% value. I can make a little bit lighter, and then it's going to taper on back and stay the way it was. So that's pretty cool, and you can really bend that curve all over the place. So you can get into really narrow value ranges and adjust them. I'm going to go ahead and reset that to where we started and show you another interesting way of manipulating this. This little button up here will let you select a value from your photo and just drag within your photo. So let's say I wanted this medium gray on the building a little bit lighter. And I'm just dragging within my image. I'm clicking and dragging. And then I want to make sure I keep this lower value a little bit more true. So I sampled that, basically sampled the value and dragged right within the image, and the curve in the properties box followed along with me. Let's go ahead and I'm going to exaggerate this a little bit more for effect. And at this point I want to remind you, we also have a mask available to us. So here's our icon for our curves, and next to it is a layer mask. Let's see what happens if we work on that layer mask. So you can apply this selectively. So I'm going to go ahead and select all, and I'm going to fill that mask with black. And I know I'm operating on the mask because I've got these four corners lit up. And what this does is it masks all those adjustments. Now if I want to, I can go in here and paint into my mask with some white. Some of those levels adjustments. I can go in here and kind of give us a spotted light scenario and kind of direct with some contrast the viewer's eye where I want it to. Let me go ahead and take a little bit of this out right there. Just like that. So I'm essentially painting in this curves adjustment to give ourselves a little bit of even finer control over our values. Let's take a look at what that looked like originally. Oh, I'm masking. That was my original photo. That's with the mask. This is with the mask off. So that's the adjustment. This is the masked adjustment. And this is the original. So these are some ways to really fine-tune your levels and your curves of value within photos and artwork. And I encourage you to take advantage of this. And honestly, this is something that you should know fairly thoroughly because it can be a really big help to your artwork. So keep on going, keep making great art.